Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the keynote session. My name is Jeffrey Shen. I'm the Associate Vice President, Global Partnership, and also Chair Professor of Construction Management. It's my great pleasure to chair this second keynote session on the second day of this USR Summit. We are delighted to have Professor Joy Johnson, the President and Vice Chancellor of Simon Fraser University, to give a keynote address. Let me give a brief introduction to the keynote speaker. Professor Johnson, as a president, is committed to enhancing student learning experience, working towards indigenous reconciliation, and advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion across the university. Prior to her appointment as president, Joy served as SFU Vice President, Research and International from 2014 to 2020, where she oversaw the evolution of cutting-edge research, innovation, and international engagement across 8 faculties. Under her leadership, SFU's research income grew from about 100 million Canadian dollars in 2014 to 160 million in 2020, the fastest growth of any Canadian universities. Joy is an elected fellow of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, and she has co-authored more than 180 peer-reviewed articles. She is currently serving on the University Canada Executive Committee. So without further ado, please join me to welcome Professor Joy Johnson, please. Hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Shen, for that very kind introduction. And I want to begin by saying what an honor it is to have been asked to do this keynote presentation. It is wonderful to be here. And I want to start by saying a special thank you to the organizers. The program this year is absolutely amazing. I want to say thank you to everyone at the University's Social Responsibility Network and to also my wonderful colleagues at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So wonderful to be together, even if it's virtually. And I'm really happy to be a part of this very important conversation. It's 9 o'clock in the evening, so it's evening for me, and I'm going to be speaking to you today without slides. So I'll try to keep it interesting, and I'm really looking forward to your questions. I'm speaking to you today from Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada, and this is on the unceded traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Coquitlam, the Squamish, and the Musqueam people. And as a settler on these lands, I recognize a responsibility to address and repair relations with Indigenous peoples whose lands we occupy. And in Canada, for us, it's so important to acknowledge this. It's an important first step towards reconciliation. The last time I attended an international USR summit, it was in person. And it was before the pandemic, and we had a wonderful time in Israel. How much has changed since then in the world and also for all of our institutions? In the blink of an eye, we all shifted to remote learning and teaching and work. And probably this has been the biggest collective undertaking in the history of post-secondary education. Yes, I have to say, in Canada at least, and I'm sure for you as well, there were a few bumps along the way. But in the end, I think that we achieved in a short period was really incredible. and it spoke to the value of post-secondary education and our commitment to serve our students and our communities. And this is something I want to speak to you about this evening or this afternoon. The topic of this year's USR Summit is Education and Action for a Sustainable Future. And today, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the action part of that title, about how I believe universities can and must change to meet the demands of a world in flux and achieve our shared hope for a more inclusive and sustainable future through research and the education of our students, who are our greatest hope for building that world. And I know this seems like a bold statement to say that we all must change. After all, each of our institutions is unique. We operate in different places, within different cultures and histories and perspectives on the common challenges that we face. But, and this is ultimately the point that I want to make today, these differences are in fact a source of strength as we come together to advance our shared goals for a more sustainable future. And when we embrace difference, acknowledge our difference, embrace our difference, different ways of knowing, different ways of teaching, learning, and acting, universities can together help to extend the horizons of the possible on that journey. You should know that I am an optimist. Although we're living through a period of profound change and uncertainty, I also believe that there is a reason to be hopeful. We saw the seeds of that hope through COVID-19. In Canada, people from all walks of life and different backgrounds came together to defend and protect the common good. And although COVID-19 did tremendous harm, it also showed us that we have the collective power to overcome the even bigger challenges that lie ahead, from climate change to the tremendous costs of social and economic inequity. So, why does difference matter to this conversation? Why do I think that universities can meet the moment that we're in by embracing difference as an animating principle of our work? So first, difference matters for the obvious reason that universities should reflect the diverse and cosmopolitan communities that we serve. This is particularly important for us at SFU. The Greater Vancouver region is one of the most diverse places on earth, made up of Indigenous peoples, refugees and newcomers, and families who have settled here in the last century seeking opportunity. Public institutions like SFU, like all of our public institutions, must reflect this diversity if we are to maintain public support and trust. Students need to feel like university is a place where they can belong and thrive. They need to feel like they're part of the community. And this just doesn't happen organically. It takes a concerted and a deliberate effort. In British Columbia, for example, post-secondary education has a long history of failing Indigenous peoples. Colonial systems of education have contributed to a disproportionate rate of poverty, lower post-secondary education rates, and lower participation in the labor market and the economy. And I'm grateful for the work of many at SFU, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, who are working to indigenize our curriculum, decolonize our practices, and help us develop good relations with the First Nations whose lands we occupy. And while I'm heartened by the progress that we're making in building pathways to success for Indigenous learners, there are still many more mountains to climb. Meaningful and lasting reconciliation requires a sustained and ongoing commitment from everyone in our university community. So too does fighting the structural racism that has been brought into stark relief by COVID-19's uneven impact on the lives of Indigenous people, Black people, people of color, women, new immigrants, and people living in poverty. We must recognize that today's gaps in university access, participation, and outcomes are based on yesterday's ignorance and oppressions. The conversations have sometimes been very difficult. The issues can be extremely challenging, but we are working to confront them, not perfectly by any means, but in good faith. So that's the first important reason why difference matters when thinking about universities and the need to change to meet the demands of a world in flux. It's clear we must reflect the diversity of the communities that we serve, and we must be deliberate about achieving that goal. This is a necessary condition for universities to have a meaningful impact and create a more sustainable future. So second, difference matters because the most pressing challenges of the day, from pandemics to the climate crisis, transcend borders and boundaries. Solving these challenges will require all of us, academics, researchers, community members in every country, to collaborate, to share knowledge, and build on each other's strengths. And that's why conferences like this one are so important. And it's why the academic community must stand firm in our commitments to international engagement in the face of the many forces that are pulling hard in the other direction. We live in an increasingly polarized and destabilized world. Global politics are complicated and always shifting. And I'm worried about how social media affects our ability to have productive dialogue with those who share different viewpoints from us. But the only way for us to effectively tackle these existential crises is by working together across borders and differences of opinion. At SFU, we're working to embed international engagement in all aspects of university life. SFU has more than 280 international partners in 25 countries around the world, including Scholars at Risk, which allows SFU to offer temporary academic positions to scholars facing threats to their safety. Our membership in the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, and of course, our partnership with everyone here at the University Social Responsibility Network. SFU is also placing a heavy focus on our contribution to meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We're developing a new SDG framework that will give us a clear path forward. I find the SDGs so helpful because they give us, across countries, across our borders, a common language to talk about the work that we're doing. And this work transcends government, industry, sectors, and as I said, borders. Through the SDG framework, we can overcome differences and engage in a common set of issues that affect us locally and globally, bringing forward the best that each of us has to offer. One more thought on this idea of embracing difference across borders. As a sector, I think universities tend to compete with one another for rankings, for prestige, for faculty, for students, the list goes on. I'm really interested in what it would look like for our sector to put an increased focus on collaboration. Our institutions have unique strengths. At SFU, we bring to the table a track record of success building partnerships with communities to affect change. We're good at that. You can learn from us. And I know that we have a lot to offer you, but we have so much more that we can learn from all of you. We don't need to compete. We need to continue building partnerships, magnifying our impact through collaboration. So that's the second reason why embracing difference matters. We face common issues across very different cultures and political landscapes. We have to marshal our differences in the service of effective collective action to solve these challenges. So I want to go to a third point. Difference matters because it makes us better scholars, better teachers, and better knowledge producers. And being better at doing these fundamental things is, I think, one of the most important ways that we can affect change. I know this view can generate some controversy, But incorporating difference into the academic canon is seen by some as an attack on the university's traditions and its claim to be the bastion of objective truth. Needless to say, I don't see things that way. I think that critics get it backwards. When we pay attention to different ways of knowing, teaching, and learning, we aren't walking away from the enduring purpose of higher education. We are reinvigorating that purpose for a new era. Let me give you one small but significant example. SFU leads a partnership of universities in a project called Extending New Narratives in the History of Philosophy. Its aim is to retrieve philosophical works of women and individuals from other marginalized groups to help us deepen our understanding of the philosophical traditions that shape us. And by doing so, bring to the surface long neglected philosophical themes and insights. The project is focusing on philosophy in the medieval, the Renaissance, and the early modern period through to the Second World War. And it's contributing to new and exciting narratives in metaphysics, in ethics, and what counts as philosophy. I mention this project because it reminds us that at its best, a university isn't about a narrow adherence to doctrine handed down by authority. There is a place for that, but not at secular schools of higher learning. Universities are meant to advance and expand our understanding of what it means to be human. The expanding narratives in philosophy project isn't breaking with the enduring idea of the university. Rather, it's prying open the canon to different intellectual traditions, different philosophical perspectives, and different ways of knowing about the world. Similarly, bringing indigenous ways of knowing and being into the classroom, embracing creative or unconventional forms of scholarship, breaking outside the canon to ensure that our students encounter a multiplicity of perspectives during their time at university is important. Again, all of this takes time and it takes effort. But I think you'll agree, it gives our students a better, a richer, a deeper understanding of our world. And this is what universities, I believe, are meant to do. So this brings me to a fourth reason why difference matters in the conversation about education for a more sustainable future. In the same way that incorporating difference into the academic canon reinvigorates our academic mission, it also reinvigorates our capacity to affect change, not as disengaged witnesses to history, but as activist participants. We have a role to shape history, and that really is what this network is all about. For me, this is the promise of an engaged academic community, of a community like the Social Responsibility Network. It's a big part of why I chose a life in academia and in university administration, because I believe profoundly in the power of post-secondary education to change lives in the world, and I know all of you do too. Like many of you, I grew up at a time when university education was expanding rapidly. I don't think it's any coincidence that the expansion of university education tracked the growth of new social movements, the creation of the welfare state, and a redistributive economy that has greatly increased the well-being of millions of people. Today, the challenges we face are very different than they were back then. But I believe that the purpose of the university endures. At this moment, at this very challenging moment in our history, a new Gilded Age marked by extreme inequality, the rise of reactionary politics, and existential threats like climate change, universities must not become instruments of narrow and entrenched privilege. As we stare into an uncertain world, universities can, and I totally believe we must be the engines for expanding the economic and democratic franchise to more people in more places. At SFU, this is our ambition. It's really part of our identity. We started as a university in the 1960s, and at that time, we were thought of as a radical campus. A lot of faculty joined SFU at that time because they were draft dodgers. They were leaving the United States and finding an opportunity in Canada. And that's how we became known as the radical campus. And now we're known as the engaged university. This is a brand that comes alive in the many ways that we work to cross the bridge from campus to community. And I know that's something that all of you are doing as well. I want to touch on a few examples. The universities in Canada and around the world played a critical role in combating COVID-19 and protecting public health. And we're called upon to help learn the lessons of the pandemic and prepare for the next public health emergency. And let me tell you, we are all certain there will be one. So to that end, Canada has established a new Canadian network for modeling infectious disease that I'm proud to say is co-led by Carolyn Colleen, a member of SFU's faculty. It's important to see universities really helping to drive forward preparedness, to use their expertise so that society can stand ready to deal with emergencies as they emerge. In addition, I want to say a few words about universities as centers of public debate and dialogue, both on and off campus. In a public square flooded by misinformation and conspiracy theories, the role that we as universities play in this regard is more important than ever. We need to take on misinformation and false claims. We need to stand up for science. And as we did through COVID-19, we need to contribute to evidence-based public health decisions. In a second example, around the world, universities are leaders in the fight against climate change. And I know that's been a topic that you've been discussing. University scientists and researchers have been courageous in their work, raising the alarm, fighting back against misinformation, and developing solutions globally and on the ground and in communities. At SFU, we are leaders in clean tech innovation and engineering, and we're building on those strengths to help support the development and implementation of clean tech policies and technologies. I'm very excited about an initiative that we're calling Community-Centered Climate Innovation, or C3I for short. C3I, through this initiative, we're building partnerships with government, with nonprofits, with Indigenous communities, with businesses and others to develop grassroots solutions to global challenges. We all have work to do in this regard, and this initiative is really driving change forward at the local level. Initiatives like C3I, together with so many others at SFU and at universities around the world, are really forming incredible networks for change and for sustainability. Networks are so important in this regard because they link together different countries, different cultures and perspectives to meet the biggest challenges of our time. So at the end of the day, this is the power that we all have when we embrace difference. Difference can be an animating principle of our work. We need to explore these differences. Together, these differences can make us stronger. At our best, universities have been agents of change. We've been fearless in the pursuit of knowledge and ideas. We've been committed to better understanding the human condition in all of its diversity and complexity. Today, at this moment of tremendous polarization and anxiety, these values are more important than they've been in living memory. By embracing difference in the ways that we know, teach, learn, and interact, we can help tackle and overcome the biggest challenges of our time. We can help to heal and repair a broken world. We can build trust, empathy, and solidarity. and we can expand the horizons of the possible. And we can contribute to a better and more sustainable world. I'm going to leave it there. I've only taken 30 minutes of our time, and that will leave us time for some questions and engagement. And I really want to thank all of you for having me today. Professor Shen, I look forward to engaging with you. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Johnson. Now, for the audience, would you please ask questions through the chat box? Now, we have plenty of time for questions to be raised to our keynote speaker. Maybe I take the liberty of being the chair of this session to ask the very first question. First of all, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I couldn't do anything like this without PowerPoint, but you have been able to do this. This is something I need to learn from you. Now, I think one of the items you mentioned a lot is reconciliation. This is a very unique context in Canada, I guess, in other countries. So may I ask the very first question, what is the biggest challenge you have ever faced to have this reconciliation in your university, at your campus? Can you share with us some examples, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Shen. So maybe I'll just give a bit more context about reconciliation in Canada. We have a horrific history in Canada about the way that we did treat our Indigenous peoples. And that history involved taking their land, taking their culture, placing them in schools, disallowing them from speaking their own language. And it really is a traumatic history, and one that Canada is deeply ashamed of. So the question is, for a nation like Canada, what do you do? And so there was a commission, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that was organized across Canada with the belief that before you can reconcile, before you can move forward, you have to tell the truth. And so in Canada, that was a process that took many years to travel across the country, to talk to Indigenous peoples across Canada about how they've been affected by colonial practices, by racism, and document that. And then out of that work, a number of calls to action were created. Now, those calls to action are related to a number of things in Canada, but there are a number specifically related to education. At Simon Fraser University, we decided that we would also engage in a process and developed an Aboriginal Reconciliation Council, which was involved our Indigenous faculty, staff, and students. And we came up with a set of recommendations for us to follow to really begin the process of moving forward with reconciliation. Now, I would say, and you've asked me what's the most difficult, it's all difficult, I would say. And in part because in Canada, at least, there continues to be new discoveries of trauma and difficulty. And every time we learn, for example, about unmarked graves of children who are buried at these residential schools, it re-traumatizes our students and our faculty and staff. And we have to stand ready to support them as they take in this information, as they deal with it personally. And I think that's been a very important lesson for me in terms of the work that we need to do. I think the other challenge that I would say is we have work to do to make our university, we've made strides. I'm very proud of many things we've done. We have more work to do to make sure that our Indigenous students feel safe at SFU, that they feel welcome, that they feel they have a place at the university. And to do that, they have to feel like they're reflected. And that's why I was talking about the diversity of our faculty and staff. They have to be reflected in the faculty and staff. They need to hear their languages spoken. They need to see their art represented on our campuses. And those are all things that we're working hard to do. You know, I think doing this work, one thing I've learned is that you're going to make mistakes along the way. And you just have to own up to that and be prepared to learn and to acknowledge that, as for me and myself, for example, as a white settler in Canada, that it's my work, it's my obligation to find ways to really move forward with reconciliation. So I know that's a long answer to your question, but I wanted to make sure I gave a bit of that context.
Well, thank you so much for sharing the examples and also your insight into this area. Now, I know you are also very committed to enhance student learning experience at your university. This is also our objectives. As you have rightly mentioned in your presentation, there are a lot we could learn from each other. So I would like to see whether there are any specific initiatives under your leadership to enhance student learning experience. Of course, it can be very broad, but any examples in a specific area?
Yeah, I'll mention a few, and I would love to hear from you too, Professor Shen, about things that are happening at Hong Kong Polytechnic as well. I mean, this is what we need to do, is learn from each other. Maybe just a few things. One thing I'll just say that's challenging us, and I know this is true for many institutions across Canada right now, is that, you know, before COVID, we couldn't get our professors to teach online at all. They didn't want to teach online, and our students didn't want to learn online. They wanted to be on the university campus. But once we moved a lot of our classes online, we now have a number of students who prefer to learn that way. We have some students who don't want to come back to campus. And I really do believe in a vibrant university community. I think it's important to have students interacting and seeing each other. I think the hallway conversations are really important. So we're giving a lot of thought to how do we use online platforms in a meaningful way? When are they pedagogically good to use for learning? Because they do enhance accessibility for some people. They do increase equity in terms of access sometimes. And so we need to think about that, but it's challenging. I think in terms of student learning, one thing I would say, and I'd love your opinion on this, Professor Shen, is that I think sometimes the best learning for our students happens outside the classroom, not inside the classroom. And that's part of the work that I'm particularly excited about at SFU, is that we've got a robust co-op program where our students can do work integrated learning, go out and spend a semester working in an industry, learning through that process, bringing that learning back to the classroom. And I know service learning for you folks is also an area that you've worked hard on. But I think, this kind of models where students are, don't get me wrong, everyone, classroom teaching is very important. But it's also important to help students think about how to apply that knowledge in the real world, solve problems, be engaged in that regard. And I think the more that we can do at universities to create those contexts of real world learning, the better off we can all be. And so that's what excites me the most. I'm always interested, and I love to hear from people who are on the Zoom today about examples of ways that they're trying to really just foster this. And it also, to the point of the social responsibility network, I think this is how we infuse a sense of social responsibility in our students, is through this kind of engagement.
Thank you very much. This is like music in my ears.
Yeah, because Hong Kong Polytechnic has been really working in service learning. Is that right?
Yes, we do. We do. I mean, service learning is one of the compulsory elements in our undergrad education, and definitely.
I remember when we visited, I was so impressed with that model. I think it's really an interesting, the model that you've developed, a very interesting model, and something that I certainly learned from when I heard about it.
I think it's also very beneficial for a student to become a socially responsible person in our society.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The other thing. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, our students want to change the world, and we need to find ways to help them feel they are, engaging in that work, right? It's fantastic.
The other one you mentioned, work integrated education. That's also another element we have for our students. I agree with you entirely. That's a great way of learning things. Now, let me move on to a question from the floor. This is a question from, let me go through the first question, okay? So we have several questions lined up for you, Professor Johnson. Now, the first one from a person called Oyama. The question is, what university can do in terms of promoting mutual understanding among different cultures and societies against the background of unlikely success of globalization?
Yeah. It's such a good question, because I think there's two things at play right now, and it's a really interesting question. One force is globalization, which is really trying to wipe out difference, I think. Trying to, go anywhere in the world and you can get Starbucks coffee and Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's the same everywhere, right? So that's globalization, which is wiping out difference. But at the same time, we're also in a situation where people are not listening to one another, and that they are, I think, very much stuck in their echo chamber, very much not, in a mode where they want to only listen to people who agree with them. And so on this, and I think the university does have a role to play, and I suggested that in my talk, and this is across borders as well. We need to find a way to become public squares, a place where different ideas can be brought together and civil dialogue can take place. And that's hard, but I think we need to create opportunities and help develop skills in dialogue and really foster dialogue. And part of that, it sometimes means that we have to be prepared to listen to points of view that we don't agree with, but we need to learn how to listen to them. Because if we don't, all we're going to do is just continue to create, I think, a lot of schisms. So for me, at least, listening, dialogue, part of good dialogue is also making sure it's evidence informed, based on evidence, creating a context. Universities are trusted institutions still, and I think we are really, in many ways, one of the last bastions to protect this. So I appreciate the question. I think we absolutely have a role to play, and I think networks like the Social Responsibility Network have a role to play.
Thank you very much. The second question we have from the floor. It's also related to what you have mentioned in your talk, differences. The world is beautiful because we are different. Now, the question is, what are the greatest obstacles to universities embracing difference as an animating principle, and how can these be overcome? This is a question from Professor Rob Hollister.
Yeah, thanks. Good to have a question from you, Rob. That's fantastic. Great.
You can ask a question to him later on.
Yeah. Well, I'd love it. Yeah, I'd love to hear from him on this one. And these are such great questions to be thinking about. I really think that at the present time, can you just actually? I'm sorry, it's getting late. Can you just repeat the question, Professor Shen? I just want to make sure.
The question is, what are the greatest obstacles to universities embracing differences as an animating principle?
Yeah, thank you. Got so distracted. Anyhow, I think actually it's conservatism. There's a lot of conservatism in the university. And that's why I use the philosophy example, because we know this. In philosophy departments across the world, everyone thinks philosophy is like Descartes and Hume, and that's the canon. That's what you teach. And I think we need to pry open the canon, and there's a lot of resistance to that. There's a lot of resistance to, this is my course and we always teach it this way, and we're not going to expand it and think differently about even what knowledge is. So even, for example, at SFU, there's a real interest in bringing in indigenous ways of knowing or indigenous knowledges into our classroom. And that's seen as very threatening by a number of people. That's not knowledge, that's not science. But those perspectives can really enrich us. And so I think there is a certain conservatism among the professoriate, and a resistance to thinking about knowledge and what knowledge is. Even think about the disciplines. If we were starting afresh today, we wouldn't develop the disciplines the way they are, but they're so stuck. Universities are organized by faculties. It's so hard to cross those areas and do true interdisciplinary work. I would say there's a resistance to different forms of scholarship, more creative forms of scholarship. If it's not a paper in Cell, Nature, or Science, it doesn't count. And that's ridiculous. There's so many ways to share knowledge. There are so many different forms of knowledge that really do deserve our attention. And our views, universities' views, are so Western-centric right now. I think we do need to give our heads a shake and think about what we're missing. There's been some great work out of Africa, and knowledges out of Africa and the African countries around their traditions and knowledge and what they can teach us. And that's another example. I just think it's really interesting to try and push back our biases and think more openly about what's possible and what we can learn.
Well, thank you. Now, actually, I changed the order a little bit. We have a question very much related to African. This is why I maybe bring this question first, and I will go back to the other question later. Now, this is a question from somebody with the name Simon Sierri. Now, the question is, thank you so much for your presentation. Now, this is the question. Considering the fact we are talking on education and action for a sustainable future, why it is difficult for some African university students to be registered in Canada, UK, etc. Why there's no means to make things easy to study as Africans? I guess this is a tough question for you.
Yeah, no, great question. And I think that we all have work to do. I really do value our international students and what they bring to our university. They bring such a richness of different perspectives, and that's another way to kind of enrich the academy, enrich our universities, and really embrace difference. And I recognize that there are a number of barriers for international students to gain access to our universities. And I think there are a number of factors at play, particularly for countries in Africa. Part of them are just some of the systems that are in place. There's certainly financial barriers as well. And then I would say in Canada is really done a very bad job in the last few years now around visa processing and gaining access to our universities. So I would say, and I know it's cold comfort, that there's a great deal of interest, at least at our university, in establishing stronger relationships with Africa and finding pathways for students to come and study in Canada and at Simon Fraser University. But I do recognize there are barriers there that we need to be mindful of and we need to address. So I really appreciate the question.
Thank you. Okay, now certainly for those students in Africa, if you are having troubles, difficulties getting a place in university like in Canada, you're certainly welcome to approach us. We do have quite a number of students from Ghana, Nigeria, a few other African countries doing.
Yeah, and we do have some. They're fantastic students. We're very, very lucky to have them. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's move on to the another question. Change the direction a little bit. The question is, actually, this is a question from a person who wished to remain anonymous.
Okay.
The question is, okay.
It should be hard then.
Okay. Should universities give priorities to research as opposed to teaching in order to have better ranking in pursuing USR or UN SDGs, especially in the less developed countries? So the question is, as president, whether the university should give priority to research as opposed to teaching, because normally research matters in all these different university rankings. Okay.
Yeah. Such a good question. So I'm going to tell you right now, I am not a fan of rankings. And I'm not a fan of rankings because you can spend your whole career as an administrator trying to chase rankings, and not many of us are going to be Oxford, Cambridge, Yale, or Harvard. I think that our job as universities is to do the very best and be the very best we can of our kind. What kind of university do you want to be? And I believe that a public institution, and SFU is a public institution, has an obligation to do excellent research, but also to offer excellent education and teaching. And I guess my perspective is that they need to go hand in hand. Because, and I do believe, and some of our faculty don't like this, I do believe all our excellent researchers should teach because they have so much to offer our students. They have so much, our students are so inspired by them. And so they need access to them. And so that to me is also very, very important. Now, don't get me wrong. I, like every other university president, look at rankings and that's the world we're living in. But I have tried to promise myself that I won't try to change course for our university to try and chase rankings. Because I really do believe that that is a fool's errand. We know, I've seen the data, it's very, very hard to climb up the rankings in any substantial way. But that being said, I do believe that every university, I just want to repeat, should really focus on excellent research, because research really is the foundation for new knowledge and approaches that will make a difference in the world. It inspires our students. But again, it shouldn't sacrifice the educational mission in so doing. And I know that's hard. And I know there's sometimes a tension there in terms of how our faculty spend their time and the resources that we have to put together to really support our excellent researchers. But I think it's a tension worth fighting for, worth trying to continue to find that balance. Otherwise, become a research institute or become a local college, not a public research university. So that I really think that's important for us to be thinking about what our obligations are.
Thank you so much. Let me move on to another question from the floor. This is a question regarding SDG. Now, is internationalization of education the way to go in addressing the complex need of SDGs?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, I think the Sustainable Development Goals really set forth a set of issues for our time that really transcend boundaries, are global in nature, require all of us to lean in on. And so I do think that they provide a mechanism for us. And as I said, what I'm finding more and more, they create a common language for us across the globe, because I see more and more universities leaning in, wanting to focus on the SDGs. And so I can, come and talk to you, Professor Shen, and say, what are you doing in SDG 13 at your university? Let's talk about, the climate emergency and climate change. Or, what are you doing, around, creating democratic societies? What researchers do you have? And how might we work on this together? So it creates a kind of a common nomenclature, which I think is very helpful. And then I would also say that these problems are very intractable, very difficult, and they do require different perspectives, different nation perspectives, different global perspectives. And we've got a lot. I really do think for many of these issues, we already have the knowledge we need to solve them, but we need to put that knowledge together, see it work on the ground, learn from one another, and find a way to move forward, get that traction. So I do think internationalization, international partnerships, connections really are key. And I see more of that happening. And I think we should, in Canada, at least I've been involved in a few initiatives trying to build partnerships around the SDGs, particularly with South America. But there's other opportunities afoot. And I just think it really is a really good platform for that.
Thank you. Just to respond to your question, what have you done as a university to address SDG 13? We do have an ambitious target to have a carbon neutrality campus by 2045, and 5 years ahead of Hong Kong's carbon neutrality target. Okay, now
that's great. Good for you.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. This is a question regarding what must change as a university. This is the topic, the title of your presentation. Now, the question, if I understand it correctly, this is a question regarding what university teachers must do or must change in order to meet the demand of the world in this time of globalization. So from the teacher's perspective, what do you think they need to change?
Well, I think like most universities, we've got some fantastic teachers, and we've got some teachers that could change for the better. And so let me talk about the ones that inspire me and what I think really is the model for us to be thinking about. And that is creating a context of learning in the classroom, where ideas are valued and generated and shared and challenged, where students feel safe to raise their questions, where different perspectives are sought and really valued. And so often that's not the case, where professor feels they need to know best, they need to be the authority, they don't want to be questioned. And I think, what teachers, good teachers need to do is find ways to pull out the knowledge and learning that students have and help them find ways to apply them. So that would be the other area that I think is application of ideas. So not simply memorization, but using new learnings, and finding ways to apply them, to interrogate them, because that's when knowledge becomes real for us. That's when we're going to retain it as well. Is when we find ways to apply it, to issues of the day, to challenges of our time, to new ideas, building on new ideas. So I think that's what I would see as some of the ways that our teachers need to continue to evolve.
Okay, thank you. Now, I noted that we only have about 2 minutes left. Maybe this will be the last question from the floor. The question from a person called Fernando Palacio. I guess somebody from a Spanish-speaking country. Now, the question is, what should be the role of universities in addressing armed conflict, especially SDG 16? So I wonder whether you have any insight for us.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that universities can provide courses, programs in peace studies, in conflict resolution. At SFU, we have a field school, a NATO field school, where students go and learn about NATO. I think that there's opportunities for real world learning in this space. And I want to come back to the notion of dialogue, because I do believe that ultimately the solution to many of our conflicts rests in dialogue. And I think that we need to arm our students with dialogic techniques so that they can learn to talk to other people of opposing points of view and listen. And we need to model that ourselves. And that often is at the heart of much of our conflict. And I think, again, we as institutions need to stand on the side of peace and that's also why, I know I only have 30 seconds left, but that's also why the refugee program, where we bring scholars at risk to SFU, is so important, because we also have a role to play to protect those who are fleeing from conflict. So I love that question. And I know we're out of time. And Professor Shin, I want to end by just saying, I'm so glad we left so much time for questions. They've been fantastic and really helped me think things through in new ways. So really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Now our technical team asked us to look at the camera, and they want to have a photo. Okay. So before we end this session, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I guess they have already taken some photos. Now, I also wish to take this opportunity to thank you again, President Johnson, for sharing your insight on such a variety of issues and topics in relation to social responsibility, SDG, university governance, etc., etc. Thank you so much. I believe the audience will enjoy your presentation and also the discussions as well as I did. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person next time.
Yeah, looking forward to that too. Thanks everyone very, very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. And I also wish to thank all the audience for your questions and also your attendance. Thank you. That's the end of this keynote session. Thank you. And enjoy the rest of the conference.